Hi guys, my name is Judah Malala and I'm a sophomore at high school and I took APHUG last year and we're gonna talk today about cultural landscape. And again, don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube on Think Fiveable. Think Fiveable. Okay, so today we're gonna be talking about cultural landscape. We're gonna talk about all of the components of cultural landscape. So we're going to be talking about cultural, the characteristics of cultural landscape, which are like religion, regards to religious landscapes, language, and culture. We're going to talk about von Thunen model, how it applies to land use and how it applies to land use. And we're going to talk about environmental possibilism and determinism. What is landscape? So landscape is the material character of a place, including natural and human structures that gives a place its identity. So this includes any kind of structure, any part of society that has a human influence on. So basically, that's like basically everything that surrounds us. For example, like this, the Great Wall of China. This is an example of cultural landscape. It is structured by society to. It has some kind of cultural meaning to the people living in that region, or whenever it was obviously constructed. It's a very old wall, right? So it shapes cultures shapes the place and landscape. So the way the culture is basically the way people perceive the world around them. So the way people perceive the world around them affect the actions they take towards their environment. So we're trying to understand that part of culture. We're gonna go through the different components of culture, see how these different components reflect into the landscape of the landscape of the environment of the people. So yeah, cultural practices vary across geographical locations because of physical geography and available resources. Yeah, so it's not just culture that affects. It's not just culture blended with other factors affect the cultural landscape affect the landscape of a place. Because I mean, obviously, like the geography, the climate of a region, the available resources obviously affect heavily affect the different influences that humans are capable of putting. Like that makes sense. I think that makes sense. Okay, so the different components of culture. We're gonna be the different components of culture is religion, language, music, art, architecture, food, folklore, and land use. We're not gonna be able to talk about all these. I mean, there are like I think 100 more of that of these components, but we're gonna talk about the main ones that usually are seen on the test. That would be religion, language, language, architecture, and land use. Those are the ones we're going to talk about today. Okay, so understanding the landscape helps us get a deeper understanding of the place's culture, background, and heritage. For example, this floating Shinto gate, right? It's a very old. It's found in Japan. It's a very old Shinto religious. It's a religious landscape that reflects a meaning, right? It has a meaning. It reflects a meaning towards the faith of the people living. I mean, Shintoism is still practiced in Japan, so it reflects a meaning into the religion, right? It has a meaning, a religious meaning, and religion is part of a culture. So understanding that will help us get a better understanding of the culture and why they have these kind of whatever altars or symbols, religious symbols. Okay, so culture is seen or is reflected in music. A lot of okay, so cultural landscape is a product of a cultural synthesis. So cultural synthesis is the blending of multiple cultures, which we don't really. It's very like, for example, in America, we have a blend of many cultures, right? Because this nation is built on immigration, right? And people from different nations immigrated here to make up America, right? So I'm just we're gonna talk about how that's seen in like music. For example, like folk music, like country music, is a mixture of a lot of like Scottish, German, African immigrants, and like it's a mixture of all these influences, all these people people's music that was blended to produce the country music. So it's mix of vocabs, instrumental instruments, and musical sounds from different ethnic groups, right? Even jazz and blues and rock and roll, they're not produced by one ethnic group. Over time, depending on the region an ethnicity lives in, it's influenced in somehow by different ethnicity. African Americans, I don't know, Germans here, we have Scottish, Irish immigrants that immigrated in the history of the US, right? I think a great example to see that, even like just understanding music by itself. A great example of that would be, I would say, the music African slaves would play, right? A lot of their songs are based on joy and hope and faith, right? Some of them are Christian too. They're mostly based on things that they mostly needed in the situation they lived in. So understanding the content and the purpose of these songs help us really understand the experiences of the people that went through during the time, right? It's very fascinating. I'm not a musician or anything, but it's 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 important to know these stuff. And then we're gonna talk about architecture and culture. We're basically gonna talk about religious worship houses and how they look differently. So on the AP exam, I think you guys have to know the different worship, how a Christian worship house will look like, as opposed to a mosque, right? A Muslim mosque. So you have to differentiate between these, and you have to know where they're usually located on the globe. So we're going to talk about Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, and Hinduism. Okay, so in Christianity, right, we call the house of worship church, right? And then some characteristics of the church, they usually have it. Obviously, it differs. It differs from the different branches of Christianity. Their church, the design of their church will look differently, but I don't really think you guys have to know that much details for this test. You just have to know the basics. And here are some of the characteristics of I think these are like Orthodox or Catholic churches, the ones that are very big and like magnificent. They look very fancy and designed. Like they usually have a central steeple, high bell towers. Religious holidays. Okay, so seeing religious symbols like a cross, or like when a country celebrates a specific religious holiday, like Christmas, for example. I think the government is during Christmas holidays, the our like Washington DC is closed. Our Congress gets like a whole like break, right? It reflects how important that religion is to the society itself. Even though the US does not have any official religion, right? Like Iran, for example, is a Muslim religion. A lot of Middle Eastern countries are Muslim, but we don't have it. We don't really have official religion in the U.S. because obviously we're constructed of multiple ethnicities. But it shows something. It shows the importance of that holiday to the population, or maybe the majority of population. Obviously, not everybody celebrates Christmas, right? Or like other like Hanukkahs, right? Religious celebrations. So this is have a different pictures of churches, right? The one on the bottom left. See, these look very different, right? The one on the bottom left is a picture of a Protestant church. So usually Protestant churches are not very like fancy and elaborated. Just like you see, like it's just a plain white like design. There's no really any like cool thing about it, and it's very like it shows a lot about the doctrines of the Protestants. But I'm not going into that. We don't really need to know any of these stuff for this course. Okay, and then the one on the top right is an Orthodox. I believe it's the St. Peter's church in Rome, in Italy, somewhere in Italy, and it's a Catholic church. Obviously, Rome. That's where the Pope is. And the one in the middle is a picture of an Orthodox church, and this is a very, very famous church in Moscow, Russia. And do you guys, can you what thing in common do these all these churches have, like in the structure? There's something in common all these structures have. Yes, I mean, it's just cross. Yeah, it's this most symbol thing that represents Christianity, right? The cross. That's what all of them have, a cross somewhere in in their design, in their structure. So we're gonna about Hindus, the Hindus' houses of worship. These are usually called temples or shrines, and they're shaped. They have a rectangular. Um, is it Hindu or it's Buddhism? Okay, no. Hindus, they have a particular shape that doesn't really, like, it's universal. It's every Hindu temple or shrine will mostly look similar, and they usually have a rectangular shape with the short towers that represent and the short towers have faces of the deities. And this is a very famous temple. It's a shrine. It's not a temple. It's a shrine. I think, yeah, it's a very famous shrine in Vers Varanasi, India. And honestly, you guys don't really know to know that much details, but I like it's important to be able to identify what kind of religion, right? What kind of the structure, what kind of religion reflects, and in what part of the world these religions are practiced. And then Buddhists. The Buddhists are the ones that vary depending on the branch or the the branch. You can say the branch of Buddhism, because in, like, for example, here in Nepal and like in Southeast Asia and in East Asia and South Asia, Buddhism is practiced differently. They have differences. They have differences in their what they believe, and obviously their temples too. So in Nepal and Tibet, their 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 temples are called stupas, and they usually have a dome. And then in East Asia are the ones that are mostly famous. So those are the picture on the bottom right, and they're called pagodas, and they have several levers, and these levers have winged roofs. And I believe it's Buddhism, right? The worshippers, they don't really go inside like a church, right? They don't go really inside and worship inside. They stay outside and they sit on the ground, and that's where they do their prayers and their worship, like their worship. I don't know if they have worship, but that's where they do their like religious practices outside in front of the great, like, these great statues. Okay, and then in Islam, in the Muslim worship house is called mosque, and this was one of the questions I got on the FE test last year. And the mosque usually have a central, like, domes, and the most famous thing about it is the long, like, towers. They call it minarets. The long, like, towers. They're very long and skinny, and that's where what's his name? What's his name? The religious leader. What's the name of the religious? Oh, the okay. The religious leader usually, like, goes up the tower, and that's where he shouts or calls people to prayer at different times of the day. So in Muslim cultures, that's like 5 times a day. That's where that religious leader would go up and call people to worship, because that's part of the culture and part of the religion. And the most famous one is the Al-Kaaba Mosque in Mecca. This is the most famous one because that's where, like, millions and millions of Muslims might make a pilgrimage to Mecca to. It's just part of the religion. So it's surrounding Mecca. Mecca is the black square in the middle. And then in Judaism, the houses of worship, like our synagogues, they're um, they're usually rectangular with stone blocks, and they have domes. If you see the golden dome in the picture, and the most famous one is the one in the Wailing Wall in Palestine, or Jerusalem. And that wall in the middle, if you guys see, that's where people go, and they put their prayers in there. They write their prayers, and they put their prayers in the wall. I don't think it's part of the religion, but I think it's just traditions that have evolved over time to create that. So I don't think it's part of their religion. I don't think they're obligated to go there and put their prayers. But I think it's a traditional thing that has evolved over time to create that, which is very cool, very interesting. Now we're gonna talk about language. Language. So this one is, I think, the most interesting one, the most, like, sometimes it's hard to understand it. Like, for example, like if you want to learn about a culture, you have to understand its language to be able to actually like really understand a culture, because language is very complicated. Like a lot of times, like culture is like shown in the way people talk, right? In language. A lot of time, like for example, like in Spanish, right? In their language, they have masculine and feminine words, right? That tells a lot about the culture, right? And even the way people interpret words that are masculine and feminine are very different. Like if you have a masculine noun, I watched a TED talk one time. This girl was talking about they were talking about describing a bridge in Germany and in Spanish. In Spanish, the bridge was masculine noun, and in Germany, it was a feminine noun. So in Germans, we'll describe the bridge as being beautiful, right? Beautiful and elegant. Okay, elegant. Yeah, beautiful and elegant. While a Hispanic speaker would say like strong, right? These are characteristics that are more attached to masculinity rather than femininity. Yeah. Um, and some vocab words that are important to know when you're talking about language, official languages. In the chat, what are official languages? That's right. The language that the government uses. What is our official language? Do you guys know what's the US's official language? There is none. That's right. There is none. We don't have it. That's we do like have all our documents in English, but we don't really have an official language, which is like it's interesting because obviously like we were talking about how we're not like it's not just Americans that migrated here. It's not just Europeans that migrated here. We have a lot of immigrants that are not Europeans, and all of Europeans don't speak English, right? All of like European countries don't speak they didn't speak English when they migrated here. So that's why we don't have an official language. And these are other like vocabulary words related to language: monolingual and multilingual. Monolingual, obviously, from the prefix mono means one, so it's countries that speak only one language. But honestly that's very rare. Most countries speak more than one language. I really can't think of a country. Do you guys know a country that's monolingual? It's hard. I think there are hardly none. I don't know. Oh yeah, that's right. France and Japan too. Yeah, France and Japan are the ones that are mostly speak that language in that region. Australia, yeah, potentially. I'm not sure. And multilingual, obviously, most countries are multilingual. The US is multilingual. Brazil is heavily multilingual. A lot of countries in Africa are multilingual. Yes, there are a lot of indigenous languages, and I think Africa is the most diverse place based like on ethnicities in around the world. And bilingual is speaking multiple languages, obviously. So language and culture, linguistic regions. Okay, we're gonna talk about how language is different different the culture of the region. So like I'm talking about like dialects, right? Dialects, for example, English dialects differ by a lot. Like just in the US, right? Just moving from state to state, they can differ. Sometimes it's hard. Obviously, sometimes it's very hard to see these differences. But if you're a linguistic, if you're studying languages, it's very easy to make these differences. Like if, obviously, like you can see the difference from the South, right? The English spoken in the South America and the one spoken in the North or the West, right? And do you guys know what Pidgin languages are? This is a very important vocab word to even to know. Yeah, so they're basically simplified version of a language, like Spanglish, for example. Like it evolved this with the like mixing of different people speaking different languages to like if you speak, it evolves over time. And some examples like Spanglish, obviously in Southeast California, we have a lot of Spanglish speakers. I mean, sometimes it's part of the culture. Like when I have a Spanish friend speaking with their like parents, it's not a thing that they think of. It just comes out. Like it becomes embedded into people's like embedded into culture. And French Creole too. I think that's in northwest northwest. I think in Morocco. Yeah, in Morocco, northwest. Africa. They speak French, I think, and Morocco speaks Arabic too. I would say French combined with Arabic. I'm not sure about that though. And the Franca, what is lingua franca? Language that a lot of people know. Yes. I would, yeah, okay, yeah, yeah. So I would say the language that's used mostly like in like Kelly was saying in communication and business, the ones that are mostly used like in like political stuff, political debates, right? When the most like when there are meetings, right, in the UN, a lot of people speak English. A lot of countries speak English, if they're capable of. The president are capable of. A lot of like this is also seen in like airplanes. Many pilots speak English. That's like the best language you can communicate to most people, obviously, because many people know English, and it's the easiest one to communicate with when trying like as a pilot, right? You need to communicate with the passengers or something. So gender role in culture, this is a big one too. This is a big one and it's an interesting one to like for me it's very interesting. The different roles of the different roles of men and women, right? In society reflects a lot about this is like how the society is constructed, right? What kind of jobs do women and men work in, right? These differ a lot across the globe, a lot. Like in the US and Western Europe, most of Russia, most of Europe and US, the men and women roles are pretty equal. They're not exactly equal, I would say, but they're pretty closer than like Asia and Africa and the Middle East, right? Especially in the Middle East, the women are not very valued that much, and I think part of that is religion. Like we see gender roles are taken from Islam, from religion, right? Women are not very, I would say they're not very valued in the Muslim faith. So, or they're not valued. They don't have really power. They don't have power. I don't say valued. That's not a good word to put it in. But they're not they're not like they don't have any kind of like they're kind of inferior to men like in a lot of ways. And in South like Eastern Europe and US, right? We see that like most of Europe, right? Most of Europe in the medieval times was Christian. So we see that Christianity ideals reflected into that part, like the roles of men and women. What like in Christianity, all men are created equal, right? They're created equal. Not Christianity, that's the Constitution. But like God created all men and women are equal. Right? So that's why we see more that equality and that principle in there more than other regions in the world. And actually, in Africa, actually, women have more roles in agriculture than men do. They actually are the ones responsible. We talked about it last time in the last stream, but we talked about this cultural group in Africa where the woman is responsible for building her house out of like mud and sticks before their marriage, and she's responsible for taking care of the animals and the agricultural like part of other side. It's very interesting. And okay, so now we're gonna talk about these two concepts. They're very important. I think most of you guys are familiar with it: environmental determinism and environmental possibilism. So can somebody tell me the meaning of one of them? Type something in the chat. Okay, so environmental determinism, yeah, like you guys said in the chat, it's the belief that the environment is what determines and shapes social and cultural life. That's the whole idea of that. And many people like oppose that because they don't really like people don't like to be determined by environment, right? So like many examples of that would be like climate and natural resources. Like obviously if you have like a mountain in front of you, like you're not going to be able to build a house on a mountain, right, without any kind of like, or like you have a river, like how are you going to build like a house right next to a river, right? If a flood comes, your whole home is destroyed. Like it's not, it is true to some aspects, but we've seen over history that humans are able to change that in technology and different things, right? In different developments, humans have been able to change these the aspects of the environment, if that makes sense. Yeah, like a person too. That's right. Like they were saying, climate. Honestly, it's very interesting. Climate also. There was a study done on like personalities, and climate affects like personalities on like it affects people on like the personal level. Like they were talking about how like people in like Russia. Okay, I don't want to be mean, but like that's what I read about in the article. That's what I learned about somehow. We people in Russia and in colder places tend to be less outgoing and less happy. Like they tend to be so like straightforward because of the climate they're living in. Like it's very interesting. It's not just that like social, like it's not just the type of things you can build, or it's all aspects of culture and all aspects of society. It's very interesting going deeper into this subject. And obviously like natural resources like affect the kind of industries, right? Industries you can start, kind of things you can manufacture, right? Climate also affects agriculture, so the type of food you're able to eat, right? But obviously we've seen, you can't really alter climate, but we've seen how different landscapes can be altered using technology to achieve something else. That's achieve something else, yeah. So now we're going to be talking about environmental possibilism. So yeah, environmental possibilism is exactly the opposite belief or idea or concept than environmental possibilism. Is the idea that even though the environment, we're like surrounded by the environment, but it's the idea that the environment can be altered by humans, right? It's not a thing that's just solid, it stays there. Like humans are able to change the environment to produce whatever, to produce whatever they want to, like to produce their social, like human activities, right? For human activities. Um, so some example of that is the Industrial Revolution, right? Can you guys type some stuff in the comment section? So one example of possibilism is how when America was first discovered, people were bringing bees over so that they could produce honey. That's interesting. Didn't know that. I didn't know that. That's interesting. Can you guys think of a way the Industrial Revolution changed the environment? I mean, some people say Industrial Revolution is still going on right now. Air conditioners caused migration to the U.S. South or North, U.S. North. That's where most industries were. Okay. Yeah, so yeah, I was only focusing on railroads. That's where like railroads were able to like cut through like mountains to transport people, right? That's like a great example of environmental possibilism, right? Even though it's a rocky, like it's very hard to commune, right, from these two places through this mountain, right? We were able to actually create a system, right? Railroads, cars, whatever, like freeways, right? Freeways is another example of environmental determinism, right? Creating a system that allows people to commute from two places that are very far, and the complexity of it, the connection of it is obviously very, very, very cool. Agriculture advancements. That's a like a straightforward one. A lot of times, right? Like planting the same seed, planting the same seed, the same crop in a field, right, will cause the field to be fertile, right? It's no longer beneficial for planting anymore. So fertilizers and planting other technologies we came up with, like crop rotations, altered that, right, and reverse it so the field can be able to produce something, a good crop, right? technological revolution, and then genetic engineering. Genetic engineering is another one, right? Being able to alter the chromosomes in like I think tomatoes and fish. There were ones we read about last year, where they were able to alter the like I don't know what the genes. Can we say genes? I think the chromosomes of tomatoes, so they can last longer and not like rotten over like transportation, right? Transportation, because transportation is pretty long, especially if the fields are not close by. So they were able to do that, and that's a great example of environmental possibilism, right? We're fighting against environment to achieve a goal in society, whatever that is. And that triangle thing is a great example of that. I really like personal factors, behavior, and environmental factors affect the environment and society and culture as a whole. Like it's not just behavior like culture, right? It's not just culture that plays an important role in it's not just culture that plays an important role, right? It's the factors of culture and other aspects of the places, right? Of the place, like the environment and economic factors too. It's economic factors, political stuff too. Political stuff also affect culture and the way people perceive things, obviously. And then now we're going to be talking about land use and different agricultural methods and techniques that are used to, among different cultures or different parts of the world, depending. See, like economic and like it's very connecting. Like depending on what type of crop you're using and what's the economical purpose of planting that. Is it like for commercial or only for like personal consumption, right? This is like it's all intertwined, right, into culture. It's not just like it's very connected. It's connected. You can't really like divide them. So so there are specific agricultural practices. So you have different rural land use. So these are different patterns in agriculture, right? We see cluster, dispersed, and linear. Like for example, the linear one, the one in the middle, right? I would assume that the plantations are around some kind of resource, right? Obviously, for plant crops, it's mostly water, right? Maybe it's around a river, right? That's where. So see, this is another example of determinism, right? Environmental determinism. People settle, especially people settle back then. People settled around natural resources, right? Like water. Like mostly water. That was the main natural resources, right? For crops, mostly that was water, and obviously for fertile land. But if it's close to a river, the land would be most likely fertile. And some examples of land uses are shifting agriculture, nomadic herding, and ranching. These different methods affect the environment in a different way. For like nomadic herdings, people like it's still a cultural thing. Nomads will always be moving. Even like the main reason what they moved is because they're looking for food, right? Or looking for food and water for their animals. But even like it's a cultural thing. Like nomads still exist until this day, and it doesn't mean that where the region where they live in there is no resources. But it's still a cultural aspect, traditions. They're not gonna just leave traditions and completely alter their lifestyles. Yeah, you're right, Maddie. The Nile River in Egypt, right? This is a great example of the very old civilization of the Egyptians. Yeah, that's why I think that was one of the most civilized, like one of the first civilizations that emerged because of the availability of water, and because of the availability of water, they were able to make crops, and make food, and because of that, people were able to eat. Like it, we see how that affects it. We've seen that how that affects it in different. And now we're gonna talk about the von Thunen model for land use. So this basically models is mostly on the cost of the transportation of materials. So it has some assumptions. So the marketplace is the one in the middle, that's where everybody buys his stuff from. That's where every single crop and every single resource has to be transported for people to get it, right? So farmlands, let me come up with, okay. So the marketplace is in the middle. The dairy farming region is the first circle, or the first circle, because why is that? Dairy farming, transportation of dairy products, milk and cheese, and yeah, etc. Why is it the first, one of the closest ones to the market? Do you guys know? Perishable products. Yeah, perishable products. So it's all about, this model is all about money, And then forests because of the heavy wood, right? Heavy wood, the cost of transporting heavy materials is very high. That's why it's very close. This model is very modified. Like we see that a lot. Like, for example, in California, right? A lot of palm farmlands are very close to the market because they're perishable. Like, we've seen that, but it's not like in this like cool concentric design. We've seen it a lot in our current like world. Like this actually applies to some extent. And then grains and field crops are all the way to the like very far from the market because they're not perishable. They take long until they perish, and because they're very light, so the transportation cost is very low. And then launching a livestock is all the way out there because it requires a lot of land, and a lot of land means a lot of money. That's why it's all the way away from the market. And that's the end of our stream. And again, don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at ThinkViveable. Thank you for showing up, guys. Have a great rest of the week. Bye.